What does Canada think of Drake? Let's find out. So, a couple of weeks ago, I was hit by the Globe and Mail, which is a big newspaper in Canada, to talk about Drake versus Kendrick Lamar and to give some insights from an American perspective on this beef. The article went live, and I think there's some interesting insights that we need to take a look at of how the Toronto rap scene views their hometown hero. So, this is the Globe and the Mail, and the title is Toronto Hip Hop Scene Needs Rebrand amid Drake Kendrick beef, some rappers say. The article distills it this way. Why haven't more local artists stood up for the Sixth God? It's really interesting because as we saw with the Ken and Friends pop out, the entire city of LA came together for Kendrick Lamar. Kendrick brought together gangs, warring factions who don't like each other, came together in unity for Kendrick Lamar. You don't see the same thing for Drake. Have there been a few artists, like a 50 Cent, for example, who have been seen with Drake recently? He says they're working on some things together. Sure. But by and large, you don't hear a lot of people from Toronto who aren't explicitly OVO coming out to support arguably the biggest artist that country has had on the hip hop scene. So where are they? This is how the author states it. Why haven't more local artists stood up for the Sixth God? That is a great question. Let's find out. Rapper Sean Leon says that he's frustrated that the Clash has challenged the city's place in hip-hop culture, but he also says he has no strong urge to defend Drake because the superstar could do more for the city. Quote, what I would have loved to see during this situation is a lot of artists here stepping up and showing some support, but it's a complicated thing to do. It's very challenging because the support hasn't always been there from them towards us. And this is something I've heard from quite a few artists in Canada, especially in Toronto, because Drake has been the leader for so long. In many ways, OVO has a monopoly. If they're not co-signing you, if you're not signed to them explicitly, they really aren't there to see you as an artist flourish. The writer interviewed several Toronto rappers, and they said that Drake and OVO, quote, didn't give looks to local artists with star potential. This is a hard one. For Drake, he came up in Toronto. He calls himself the Sixth God. He's always using Toronto slang and Toronto visuals and all of his aesthetics. What is Drake's responsibility towards his city and for his country? Does he have the responsibility to put the city on his back? Does he have the responsibility to be a big brother and help that next generation of artists? If you watched my recent video about hip hop's aging problem, this is something that I address. As an artist, where is that line between looking out for yourself and then looking out for that next generation? I think what's hard for Drake specifically, he has a whole history of putting his arm around these younger artists, whether it's Yachty or City Girls, Blockboy JB, Migos, the list goes on and on. That's a strategy he's used with American artists, with global artists, as a way to keep himself relevant, as a way to keep his name circulating. But how much of that is he doing for his own city? The writer asked me specifically about this idea of regionalism. In hip-hop since the start, it was all about where you from. First it was in New York, what borough you're from, what neighborhood you're from. Brooklyn is not the Bronx, which is not Harlem, which is not Queens. Everyone had a lot of pride in where they came from. As hip-hop expanded to LA, to Atlanta, to Miami, all of these places, there was a signature sound, a signature aesthetic. What's been very difficult for Toronto is it doesn't have a discernible sound through the lens of American hip-hop culture. That was a challenge for Drake in the beginning of his career, and you could see him taking on other sounds, styles, slang from other places in America, because I think that made him feel a sense of belonging. He was a chameleon, and that helped him in most of his career, but as he battled Kendrick Lamar, he quickly saw what it's like to go up against an artist with a very distinct regional sound. In the battle, Kendrick leaned into that regional signature of LA. From the sound, the fashion, the dancing, that was something that he had, a competitive advantage that Drake didn't. This is what I said in the article. For Americans, when someone says Toronto music, whether it be Toronto rap or Toronto R&B, I don't think something immediately comes to mind. Drake and The Weeknd have always had this very pan-regional appeal, which is great because they're global artists, but the negative side is they lack any of that distinct regional signature. Rapper Killy defended Drake. He said every artist from here, especially in hip-hop, should use their voice to support Drake. Drake hasn't done anything for me specifically, but what he's done on a major scale has opened so many doors for Canadian artists in general. Me having a career right now, he played a big part in that. For Drake, there were other Canadian artists like Cardinal, like Shaw Claire, who did make an imprint on the American scene, but not to the level of Drake. Drake became the face of Toronto hip-hop. He became the face of Canada. Because of Drake, there's an OVO Fest in Toronto, and American artists are going up there to perform for him and because of their relationships to him. No one can deny that Drake put Canada on the hip-hop map. Toronto hip-hop exists because of Drake, and that's something we can't deny. So that becomes the big question. What is the responsibility for an artist like Drake? He's the face of his city, he's the face of his country, but does he have that obligation to then help that next generation? I think that would be a great strategy for him, especially where he is now in his career. He's enjoyed huge success, and now more than ever, I think he's in a place that he has to figure out what is the next move for him. What better way than to lean back into his hometown? Invest in that hip-hop scene in Toronto. Help those artists, whether they're signed to you or not. There doesn't have to be an intrinsic financial benefit to Drake. He can just help those artists, getting them studio time, getting them lawyers to look over their contracts, even just giving them A&R help. And it doesn't have to be him personally. Obviously, he's a major superstar, but he has so many resources and access to resources. I think he could really help propel and promote the Toronto hip-hop scene. As this article says, if Toronto hip-hop needs a rebrand, I would argue that Drake needs a rebrand right now. So that makes a lot of sense. Now should be the time for him to lean into his city, be the sixth god that he says that he is, and help that next generation. Pay it forward, Drake. What do you think? I would love to know your thoughts in the comments.